Hiya, and welcome to another video about Star Citizen. Now, Star Citizen is a very graphically demanding game. It takes a lot out of your processor and your CPU to be able to play the game at a decent frame rate. So I wanted to make a video kind of explaining the steps that I'd gone to make my system a little bit better, to slightly improve the performance that I get, and to maybe give some people advice, other people who have a budget and want to build a system that can get them into Star Citizen and can get them playing at a frame rate that is decent, without essentially completely breaking the bank. I mean, to be able to play this game properly and to be able to play it with decent frames, you are going to have to invest slightly, but it should not be that much of an expensive upgrade. You're not going to have to go out and buy a completely beast rig like some i7 beast to be able to play this game, if you know what I mean. As you can see, you can get decent frames in the more demanding areas with an FX 8350 or any decent either FX or Ryzen processor, or maybe even some of the lower level Intel processors if that is essentially all that you can afford or what you have to start with. So let's get into it. So, what do you need to play Star Citizen? Well, a beast PC would not hurt. An extremely good processor, a extremely good graphics card, something in the 1080 or 1070 region, and an SSD is the basis for getting these kind of frames. It says on the telemetry site that you can expect an average of 54 frames per second, but that is specifically an average. So people with this kind of rig who will be maybe rocking an Intel i7 something like 77K or whatever it is, and maybe one of the Ryzen 7 series, are going to be looking at in areas like Port Olisar, maybe up to the triple figures in frames numbers, and in your more built up areas like Lawville and ArcCorp, maybe about 60 frames per second, which is what we all want. Now, my system sits just outside of the spectrum of the lower end, essentially. Now, I'm going to explain to you why this telemetry does not give you a perfectly accurate view of your frames per second, because you will get a range. This is essentially an average. So I am apparently getting an average of 26 frames per second, but I'm currently in a very built up area. I'm in Lawville, which has taken my average down. If you can actually see, my CPU score, sorry, is 69. Now that has gone down from 70 exactly, I believe. So it's just gone down one, but my GPU score is terrible, and that's where my current bottleneck is. But I only have a 4 gig graphics card. Now, Chris Roberts himself did actually say that eventually this game will be playable on hopefully 4 gigs of VRAM. 4 gigs of VRAM should be what you need. And since object container streaming came in, the game with that specific amount of VRAM has essentially become playable. Now, with this exact, not this exact same system, with a very similar system, the exact same graphics card, but with a 6100, an FX 6100 processor, I was actually not able to play Star Citizen properly until 3.3 came out. Just before 3.3 came out, in fact, when 3.2 became stable and extremely playable. Now, when they introduced object container streaming, obviously everyone's frames went essentially through the roof. People who had been experiencing 35 frames per second started getting about, triple figures in less built up areas like Port Olisar. But what do you essentially need? Like, what would be the paper value of getting into Star Citizen right now? Now, if you are someone who is a massive fan of the game, a massive fan of the project, but you don't have the kind of computer to run it, then I would suggest buying a budget system like mine, or building a budget system like mine that will get you the playable frames that you want in pretty much every other game that you will play. I play Final Fantasy 15. I've had Metal Gear Solid 5, I think it is, on there. I play GTA 5, I've played Mirror's Edge Catalyst, I've played some pretty demanding games on here. And I'm always kind of, now that I've got the 8350, I'm always getting decent performance. Enough, essentially, to play the game and enjoy it. And generally better frames in more finished games, or in essentially complete games, as opposed to Star Citizen, which is still in the alpha stage. So, the 8350 would be the basis of any upgrade that I would suggest to someone, specifically if they have an AMD system that supports AM3 Plus processors. This is essentially going to be the best that you can get. There is another processor, I think it's called the 9590 or 90 something, and it is apparently a beast of a processor, close to the more modern processors in performance, close to the Ryzen, so you're going to be having a stock speed of about 4.7 gig, I think it was, which is close to Ryzen performance. But what turned me off that processor is, one, the price, which was through the roof, and the fact that it supposedly had overheating issues. Now, this comes with the Wraith cooler, which I've shown on a previous video on my page, on the video for the CIT beam case, and I think specifically a video for the FX8350 processor itself. And this processor costs £56. So you're going to be paying less than 60 quid, maybe about $70 to $80 for a processor that will get you playing the game at decent frames. For a budget, definitely. 8 cores, 8 threads, and a stock 4 gig clock speed, which is more than good enough for most games nowadays. I mean, it's an old processor, so you're not exactly going to be future-proofing yourself with this processor, but if you are on a budget, then it's the one to go for, I'd say. So in terms of processors, definitely the 8350. Graphics card, I'd say, with graphics cards, I have an issue with a slight bottleneck with my graphics card. Now, I do believe that that is going to be overcome once they finish the network side of object container streaming, because no matter what people say, I do believe that the network optimizations are having a massive influence on performance, and that the limitation of the network is kind of having an effect on the client side frame rate. All we can do client side is essentially improve our hardware, right? Because there's not much you can do. I mean, all of these going into the games, and you can change settings a little bit, change down to a lower resolution, but essentially all of these going into the game and like changing a few things, it doesn't really work. Basically, what you need to do is get a better processor, or possibly, or graphics card, or possibly invest in something like Shadow, which will leverage your internet connection and give you better performance, basically. So, one of the most, if not the most important thing, aside from the processor and graphics card, is not necessarily the amount of RAM you have, because I have an odd number. In fact, I actually have 11 gigabytes of RAM. So I have, I think, 2 4 gig sticks, a 1 gig stick, and a 2. They are the crappiest budget RAM that you can get. So if I was to improve the speed, maybe that would give me some kind of performance increase, because I am running 133 RAM. But the RAM, once you've got over 8 gigabytes of RAM, Star Citizen is currently using about 9 at the moment. So it's not necessarily going to have a massive influence. Higher speed, if you've got like 188 or 1666, I think it is the fastest. I'm not sure what are the faster RAM speeds, because I have simple budget RAM. But if I was to improve the RAM speed, I do believe I might get a slight performance increase, but it would only be slight. Nowhere near to the same degree as you're going to get from improving your processor or the SSD. Changing from a hard drive to an SSD is essentially going to be the most impactful change or improvement that you can make, aside from improving to a very good processor or a very good graphics card. Now, what do I mean by very good? Well, you want something in the, I think it's the 1080 range, I believe. So an NVIDIA GTX 1070 Ti or GTX 1080 Ti will definitely get you the kind of performance that you need. I would say that the minimum spec, and I am running kind of graphics card, you can obviously see that from the GPU score, I'm running at a 25 GPU score, which is what is lowering my frames. I'm doing much better in terms of my processor score, which is at 75. So if I was to improve my graphics card to, say, a RX 580 or RX 570, an 8 gigabyte, I would be somewhere in this region, I believe, or somewhere in this region, I believe, sorry, with the paired with the 8350 processor. I believe there's an 8350, there we go, 8120 8 gig processor, and that's paired with a 1080 Ti. And again, i5's kind of comparable to the 8350, paired with a 1080 Ti will get you over 60 frames per second. So it does look like, although Star Citizen at the moment is very CPU bound, once you're over a certain area, so once you're over the 50 to 60 GPU score, which is the current bottom line, sorry, the 50 to 60 CPU score, which is the current bottom line, you can get decent performance if you're running with a bit of a beast of a graphics card. And I do think a bit of a beast of a graphics card is what Star Citizen really does need. So, as I said, the 1080 Ti is probably the top of the range that you'd want to go for. My RX 550 would probably be the bottom line. A 4 gigabyte graphics card is about the bottom limit that you can get decent frames from Star Citizen with. And if you wanted to find a middle ground, I believe the GTX 1060, 6 gigabytes, so 6 gigabytes of VRAM will get you decent performance. Now on eBuyer, the GTX 1060 is the most affordable. If I just sort that out by price. Yep. I have no idea what all of this is, but the GTX 1060 is probably the most affordable graphics card that you're going to be getting in the 6. It's the only 6 gig graphics card, isn't it? But it's probably a good middle ground between the GTX 1080s if you're going for an NVIDIA build. However, I, as an AMD fanboy, would much prefer something which is more affordable and essentially going to get me better, if not equal, performance. So my next upgrade will probably be the RX 570 because it's the most affordable of the AMD 8 gigabyte GPUs, and you can find one on eBuyer, is that for £140, which is not bad at all. So, in conclusion, SSD and a decent processor is what you really need to play Star Citizen with decent performance. So, I wanted to make one final point before I go, and once you have essentially finished building your rig and getting together the pieces that you need for the game to perform smoothly, you're obviously going to need a game package. Now, you've got a choice between the Mustang Alpha and the Aurora, I believe it's the MR, as starter ships. Now, either one of these starter ships is a good place to start the game, and I would suggest getting one of them if you're even slightly interested in the game, and just getting into the game and playing it. Seeing what frames you get, seeing how you like the game, how you like the different mechanics, the few mechanics that we have to mess around with at the moment, and give it a little test run. And once you have gotten to know your starter ship, you're going to be looking to upgrade to something like the Avenger Titan. So, if you like this video, please like and subscribe, and thank you very much for watching.